I tested over 500 battles and spent nearly 50 hours learning everything I could about the combat systems in Manor Lords. In this video, I'll share everything I learned along the way so you can get the most out of your army. As always, there's a link in the description to the databases for all to use for free, and I've added timestamps so you can skip around. Before we get into each unit and their upgrades, let's look at all the stats to make sure we fully understand what they mean. Morale is the stat that determines a unit's willingness to fight. When it gets low enough, they will ignore commands, and if it drops to 0, the unit will flee back home. You get morale boosts by having a stronger force than the enemy, fighting in your home region, etc. Morale is lost by being around dead bodies, being flanked by the enemy, being surrounded by woods, etc. Fatigue determines how effective a unit can fight and if they're able to run or not. As a unit fights or runs, they will deplete fatigue, and the only way to restore it is to stop moving and fighting for a time. Effectiveness is a multiplier for a unit's attack or defense stats. There are many things that can increase or decrease this stat, such as having low fatigue, fighting up or downhill, being surrounded by the enemy troops, and so on. Most other stats are what you would expect. Attack for damage, armor for defense, anti-armor for negating enemy armor. The shield stat reduces incoming damage from the front. Charge is a bonus attack damage when a unit sprints into an enemy unit. And Impaling is the anti-charge stat that cancels an enemy's charge and reflects some of that damage back onto them, provided the unit is not moving and is facing the enemy. Now let's look at each unit and their respective upgrades to see how these stats change, starting with Spear Militia. They have 1 attack, no anti-armor, 8 shield, and 10 impaling regardless of the armor. There's no difference between stats with and without a helmet, unfortunately, but a helmet in Gambeson will increase armor from 5 to 7, and with a helmet in mail up to 15. They also pick up 2 charge damage with the mail armor for some reason. You'll notice the armor stat is 3 times stronger with the best armor equipped than with no armor at all, which will be obvious when we get to the testing. The high armor and shield stats make the spearmen perfect for the front line to soak up damage. Also, a quick note, helmets do actually do something, but they don't reflect in the armor stats. But we'll see that later when we get to the actual combat testing. Next, we have the Militia Footmen. They have more damage than the Spearmen at 2, but less armor and shield protection at 3 and 3 respectively. They lack charge damage, anti-armor, and impaling as well. With a helmet in Gambeson, their armor increased to 5, and with a helmet in mail, their armor increases to 12 and charge damage to 2. These units have double the attack damage as the Spearmen, but are more vulnerable with less armor and shield protection and should be used to flank enemy units rather than direct contact. Now we'll take a look at the Polar Militia. These units have a high attack of 2, but lack protection with 1 armor and no shield. They do get 2 charge damage even without upgrades though, and can pierce some armor with 2 anti-armor stats. With a helmet in Gambeson, they move up to 3 armor, and with a helmet in mail, they move up to 11 armor and get a whopping 4 charge damage. Ideally, these units will be held in reserve and deployed against units who are already engaged in combat, allowing for a massive charge bonus. They can also be used against heavily armored opponents like enemy retinue troops. In the current early release build, archers shouldn't be used as their damage has been nerfed to the point of making them useless. However, in the previous patch, they were dominant, so we're looking at their stats to prepare for their eventual return. They have very few stats to speak of though, only 1 armor and 4 ranged attack at a 48 meter shot distance. With the helmet in Gambeson, they move up to 3 armor, and with the helmet in mail, they have 11 armor and 2 charge damage. Archers should always be deployed to skirmish in the front or held behind the spear wall to pepper the enemy. When possible, they should be moved to the flanks of the enemy at close distance, allowing them to get off massive amounts of damage in the enemy's flank. Let's recap how armor works. The helmet upgrade doesn't reflect in the stats, but does increase performance slightly, which we'll see soon. Putting on a Gambeson adds +2 armor, while wearing mail increases armor by +10 and charge damage by +2. Helmets can be worn by any level, while the Gambeson is reserved for level 2 Burgage plots and mail for level 3 Burgage plots. This means for every family living in a Burgage plot level 2, we can have 2 militia equipped with Gambeson, and for every family in a Burgage plot level 3, we can have 2 militia equipped with mail. Level 3 Burgage plot militia still wear Gambeson if no mail is present, so it's a good idea to have at least a few of those in storage just in case. Unfortunately, you can't determine who gets to wear the armor, and it's somewhat evenly distributed among all your units. This means that unless you have all Burgage plots to level 3, each unit will be a mix of whatever plots and equipments you have available. I highly recommend pushing for all Burgage plot level 3s as fast as possible so you can get the best equipment for your men. Now that we've covered Militia, let's look at Retinue, since they're very different from regular units. The basic Retinue comes with 4 attack, 17 armor, 3 charge damage, 1 anti-armor, and 2 shield. The upgraded Retinue has some meme stats, to be honest. 82 armor and 62 shield is ludicrous, but it does give up 2 charge damage for some reason. Each Retinue costs 50 gold to hire and can be recruited up to a maximum of 24 per region, assuming you have the tower extension from the Manor house. Upgrading each unit costs 34 gold each, unless we have the Better Deals perk, which reduces import costs by 10. Given how expensive these units are, I think it's best to upgrade each Retinue first before hiring new ones. If money is tight, then use them sparingly because a single loss will cost you close to 100 gold. And finally, let's look at the Mercenary units and see how they stack up to Militia. These are all the Mercenary units in the game: 2 spears, 7 footmen, 5 archers, and 4 thugs. There are 8 Mercenary bands to hire, costing anywhere from 15 gold per month up to 110. Hiring all 8 will run you just shy of 500 gold per month. The Light Mercenary Spearman is compatible with the Militia Spearman with a helmet and Gambeson, both having 1 attack, and the Mercenary has 1 more armor. However, the fully armored Militia Spearman has nearly double the Mercenary stats and has 2 charge damage. Looking at the Light Mercenary Infantry, we see the same pattern. They're comparable to the Footmen with helmet and Gambeson, both having 2 attack, and the Mercenary having 1 more armor. But the fully armored Footman has double the armor and 2 more charge damage. There are 2 types of Mercenary Archers, the Light and the Heavy variant. The Light Archer has identical stats to the Militia Archer with helmet and Gambeson, while the Heavy Mercenary Archer lies somewhere between the Gambeson and the male Militia Archer, with 7 armor and 1 charge compared to 11 armor and 2 charge. And finally, there are 4 different types of Brigands you can hire. Their stats are all over the place. Attack damage either 1 or 2, armor either 3 or 4, charge damage 2, 3, or 4, and shield 1 or 2. Brigands are most comparable with Polearm Militia, but do have some big differences. Polearms have no shield protection while the Brigands have some, and Polearms have 2 anti-armor while Brigands have none. The other major difference? Brigands come in with only 18 units or half strength to that of the Polearm Militia. Moving on from unit stats, let's look at the 5 different stances of each unit, starting with Give Ground. As soon as the enemy hits our line, our units begin to back up. However, it's not always in a straight line, and they soon begin to spin in circles and expose their flank. Also, units set to Give Ground will take massive losses while inflicting very little damage to the enemy, so this stance should only be used sparingly, like drawing an enemy to a hill or pulling them behind your main line for an easy flank. Missile Alert increases defense against arrows by double, but cuts melee defense in half. I couldn't test arrow defense since archers are so weak right now, but these spears didn't suffer any casualties in melee, so it's questionable if the formation works or if brigands are too weak to deal damage. The balanced stance doesn't give any bonuses, but it also avoids penalties and performs as you might expect. Again, the spears handled these bandits without any issue. Stand Your Ground doubles units' defense, but cuts attack frequency in half. From testing, I also noticed the Stand Ground negates most of the enemy's charge damage, as we'll see in the next clip. Archers typically lose between 5 and 6 units when these brigands charge their line, but since they're in Stand Ground, they don't take a single loss. Also, our spears fight just as hard in Stand Ground as they did in Balanced. I put these 2 clips together in my editing software, and Stand Your Ground was a single frame faster than Balanced. If we account for a small margin of error, these 2 clips would be identical in length, so I'm not sure if Stand Your Ground is functioning as intended. And finally, my favorite stance, Push Forward. This formation has our spears push the enemy line back, but also has the added benefit of our units getting more attacks off and causing more damage overall. As we'll see from the data, Push Forward performs better than all other formations. There's a few other commands to look at. Mercenary Spears and Footmen have the ability to form a shield wall, which increases their shield blocking, but slows their movement speed significantly. Retinue and Mercenary units also have a spread out function which reduces damage from incoming arrows, but reduces melee combat effectiveness. It's supposed to give the unit a slight speed increase, but through my testing, it didn't seem to make any difference while walking or sprinting, so I'm not sure if this is implemented properly. Archers also have 2 extra abilities. Shoot at Will, allowing for a significant increase in damage at close range, but causes much less damage at farther range. We can also allow Friendly Fire, which can be useful for fighting off units engaged in melee with our own friendly troops. I'll test these further once archers are fixed. I also checked all unit speed while walking and sprinting, and everyone had the same movement speed. I made sure to give individual move commands to make sure they weren't grouping up and moving as one group, but they still had the same speed. I feel like I've seen my footmen and polearms run faster around the battlefield than my spears and retinue, but I wasn't able to reproduce it here in my testing. Now on to everybody's favorite part, unit testing data. I simulated close to 500 battles, but only collected data from about 250 or so. I did my best to isolate certain variables by testing saving right before specific combat scenarios, then running multiple tests with that save to compare the results of the change. I started small, testing the initial 20 spears against a group of 16 brigands. I kept the fatigue meter maxed out and ran 5 battles. Spears didn't win a single time and the KDR was quite bad at 0.28. I then sprinted the spears to drain their fatigue and tested to see how much worse they would perform, and sure enough, 0.06 KDR. When we switch to Missile Alert, we see an immediate increase, losing only a single spearman in 5 battles. Be aware, KDR is undefined if no losses are sustained, so the average KDR at the bottom is useless if we have 0 in any of these columns. I ran the tests again, but with low fatigue this time, and some battles went well while others did not. The main difference between a good round and a bad round usually came down to the AI charging or not. When they landed a good charge, they would kill several right off the bat. If we remove the 0 death tests, the KDR is still north of 2 on average, but it's clear that lower fatigue has a big impact on combat ability. I retested this scenario again, but gave the spears a high ground advantage, and it seemingly wiped away the debuff from low fatigue. Maintaining the high ground can be quite important for close battles. I tested balanced, which seemed to perform well regardless of the fatigue level. Low fatigue makes it easier to sustain casualties, but the win is still guaranteed. Looking at stand ground, we see some solid numbers, but still more losses than balanced or Missile Alert. It's hard to verify if the armor increase is actually taking place, but assuming it's functioning, then this stance should only be used to hold off enemies as long as possible, allowing you to maneuver or flank the enemy. You could use this stance to absorb the enemy charge, but be sure to switch out of it to something else right after. And for my favorite, push forward. With the full fatigue meter, not a single spearman was lost. Even with low fatigue, very few losses were recorded and most tests still ended up with no losses at all. I noticed when on push forward, our troops will actively seek out the closest enemy to strike, while the other stances, they are more passive and wait for somebody to come into their range. In nearly all tests we see from this point on, push forward was the best stance to use. For the next set of tests, I fought off a single squad of 18 raiders with only 16 militia troops, varying up the unit type and several other factors. I started off testing footmen in the balanced stance with no armor. They performed well, only losing 2 troops in 5 tests. But, like with Bannerlord, I wanted to see if the line length made a difference, so I tested a shorter front line. When the line is extended to single file, every troop is able to attack and the battle is over quickly. But when we form a square instead of a line, battle is much longer and casualties much higher. Looking back at the data, we see a dramatic difference in KDR when in a square shape. Most battles ended with 5 to 6 times as many deaths as the line. I decided to test this further using the stand ground stance. The first 5 tests were a long line, the next 5 in a square, and the final a square, but adding a counter charge before the lines meet. Again, we see amazing results for the line, poor results from the square, and slightly better results for the countercharge square. Although I learned later that double-clicking attack to charge also switches the stance to push forward, so most of the increase in performance is from the stance rather than the actual countercharge itself. Next up, I tested the Polearm Militia using the same setup as the previous test. I had to run more tests than before because the data was inconsistent, with some tests showing a flawless victory and others showing a total defeat. This was most likely caused by the AI landing a solid charge some of the times and no charge at all in other cases. When a charge was landed, several units would die instantly, causing issues for the militia. I tried to countercharge to correct this issue, since polearms have charge damage, but the issue persisted. As I stated earlier in the video, these units should not be used in heads-up combat given how fragile they are. Next, I tested polearms in the stand ground stance, and they seemed to be a bit more durable. I ran more than double what I normally do to make sure it was consistent. They suffered less casualties on average than the balanced stance. As I mentioned in the previous dataset, they would lose several troops if the brigands landed a solid charge. But in stand ground, the charge damage is negated completely, and the polearms are able to get off their damage. Once again, we see how weak having a smaller front line than the enemy is, and casualties are high. And finally, push forward, which performed as well as we hoped. And since polearms have charge damage, I tested using a counter charge while in a long line to see if it made any difference. Unfortunately, the AI's charge is more effective and several casualties were sustained. Do not use counter charge using polearms as they will get torn to shreds. And finally, let's look at archers. We won't spend much time here as there isn't much to look at, but I wanted to reiterate the point about standing ground. You'll notice our poor archers were slaughtered in balanced and push forward stances, but got upwards of 0.44 KDR when on stand ground. It just proves how important stopping the charge damage is for any unit, and stand ground works in that regard. The next dataset was designed to test the effectiveness of armor upgrades. I picked a battle that was not possible to win, which would give more accurate results for performance upgrades, since winning all battles without a single loss doesn't give much room for improvement. This is a standard late game raid against 4 sets of brigands, and we'll be using a full set of polearm militia. Since push forward was the strongest stance, I decided to use that for all the tests. I also decided to run 10 tests instead of 5 since these battles have a lot of variance. Our polearm militia killed anywhere from 14 up to 25, which is a pretty wide range considering each battle was identical up to 2 seconds before the lines met. Without any armor, these polearms averaged 0.54 KDR over 10 battles. We repeat the same 10 battles, but equip our troops with a helmet. We didn't see any improvement to the armor stats on the tab pop-up, but looking at the data, it does seem to help their survivability and allows them to get better results. We went from 0.54 KDR up to 0.61. It's not a huge increase, but it's definitely noticeable in the data. Now, we do see a big difference once we equip helmets and Gambeson, even managing a 1 KDR for one of the battles. They end with an overall 0.84 KDR, which is a massive difference from the 0.54 with no armor. And finally, we swap the Gambeson for mail and retest. While it's still a total loss across the board, the KDR is well above 1, proving once and for all how incredibly effective good armor is. Our same militia are nearly 3 times more effective, going from 0.54 KDR up to 1.33. I can't stress enough how important it is to reach Burgage Plot level 3 so you can equip mail armor. And if you're wondering how effective Retinue are in this situation, you're in luck. I tested both the base Retinue and the fully upgraded to see how they would do in this exact same battle. Unfortunately, the Retinue still can't pull off the victory here, but they do manage to kill more than the fully upgraded polearm militia while having 12 less units to start with. They ended with a 2.5 KDR overall. Keep in mind though, these Retinue cost anywhere from 74 to 84 gold each, so losing 24 to wipe out a raid is not cost effective. Now let's look at the upgraded Retinue, but I want to point out one issue that I had with this testing. No matter how much running and repositioning I did, the bandits would never clump up together and I had to take the fight with them strung out in a line. This changes the outcome quite a bit because they're effectively fighting with even numbers in multiple stages as opposed to outnumbering our Retinue 2.5 to 1 from the start. Looking at the data, we see a 100% win rate and a massive KDR of over 11. Again, part of this was due to the testing setup, but there's no doubt that upgraded Retinue are the best units in the game and can be used against raids. It didn't feel right only testing fully upgraded polearms, so I went back later and tested spears and footmen as well. To my shock, spears actually performed well and won this battle. But as more data came in, I realized it was a nasty case of variance. Overall, spears still lose more than they won, but performed better than the polearms. Likewise, the footmen performed well for the first couple of battles, but after the data was collected from 10, it was clear. These militia are very effective against raiders. One theory is that their attack damage is fast enough to cause a mass rout near the end, but has enough armor and shield blocking to prevent early deaths. The spears have great armor, but not enough damage to cause quick deaths and a collapse of the enemy morale. Polearms have the damage, but not enough armor to survive those early hits, and their losses cascade into a defeat. Now I actually have a save file for each armor level to test against the final battle, but unfortunately the battles are so chaotic, it's difficult to get useful information from them. In order to test other units, I would need to have a custom battle scenario where I can isolate units to fight each other. After fighting this battle dozens of times with no armor, helmets only, helmets with Gambeson, and helmets with mail, I can say conclusively that we need thousands upon thousands of battles worth of data to draw any useful conclusions for any individual units. However, I can't share my thoughts on how to best go about combat in Manor Lords, at least for the current patch. When fighting an enemy, make sure your lines are longer than the incoming enemies. Use stand ground to counter the enemy charge, and do not countercharge because the AI will win the majority of those clashes. Most stances perform well in combat except give ground, which would be reserved for extremely niche situations like avoiding a flanking enemy or moving back for a hill bonus. Push forward is never a bad stance to be in and provides the best damage output. Footmen and polearm units have high attack damage but low defense and should be held in reserve to flank the enemy. Spearmen are great at holding the front line, but have low damage, which will lead to a prolonged battle and more losses. Don't use archers right now until they're fixed, but when they are fixed, they should be positioned at the enemy's flank from a very close range. Polearms are great at countering enemy retinue troops, even better if the retinue are already engaged with somebody else. Morale is similar to approval in that buffs and debuffs can stack very quickly. Inflicting heavy casualties or completely surrounding an enemy in a short amount of time can quickly cause them to rout, but you've got to do it before friendly reinforcements arrive because that will give them a morale boost. Hopefully for the next patch, we get access to console commands or a combat editor so I can run more tests with all the units and not just retinue and militia. I'm curious what surprised you most about these tests and what you would like to see changed first with combat and Manor Lords. A huge shout out to all the Patreon supporters and YouTube members who help make videos like this financially viable. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.